Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Tej Seth on the show. He is a data scientist at Sumer Sports. Tej, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk to you today. You know, you're someone that I looked up to throughout a big part of my sports analytics journey. So I'm excited to be on the show today for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much. And, I appreciate things that you have done for me, like encouraging me to put together, for us to put together an Ann Arbor Analytics Social last year, which was super fun. And we had a chance to get a lot of people together, but I appreciate the kind words. This podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Tej, is there a football bet that you would be willing to share your process on?
For sure. I mean, we have to talk national championship, I feel like, that being on everyone's mind here. And I guess there's two bets I really like on the game, but one that I like more than the other, and that would be the under on the total of 55.5 is what I see it at most sports books. And when I think about the story of how this game is going to play out, knowing how Michigan tends to game plan for these types of games and knowing the staff and how well they understand the opponent when they put together their game plans, Michigan is going to run the ball a lot in this game. I think they've been doing that the whole season. They have a plus 6.1% rush rate over expected, according to Parker Fleming, who does that work on CFB graphs. And then Washington's defense is ranked 125th in defensive success rate allowed when stopping the run. So they have not been a good run defense the whole year. I think even though Texas's offense didn't play a great game, we saw Texas be able to run the ball, especially in the first half against Washington, and Michigan has a much better run game than Texas has, with Blake Corum being able to take advantage of that. So I think there's going to be a lot of running from Michigan side of the ball in this game, which is going to decrease the amount of possessions, which helps the under. And then from Washington's side of things, I think that Washington's offense has been awesome this year. 3 NFL receivers, and Penix has really been able to take advantage of it. But Jesse Minter might as well be one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football right now. And he can put out a pretty good game plan to slow down Washington's offense and maybe force them to not be able to score at the rates that they're used to.
Absolutely. I had CJ Baxter, the Texas running back, under 81-ish rushing yards. And man, that looked terrible in the first half. I thought that was a sure loser. But just getting to your point about how bad Washington's run defense is, and they're significantly better at pass defense. They have some edge rushers that are pretty good. So I definitely think that is certainly the game script. If Michigan gets up in the first half, they'll run Blake Corum. That's their ideal situation, right? It harkens back a little bit to the second half against Penn State, where they only dropped back to pass twice. They basically ran the ball. So that I definitely see that as well. Do you have any interest in Blake Corum over 101.5 rush yards?
Wow, that's a very high rush total. I can't really remember the last time I saw something like that. I think it's more of I would bet maybe his rush attempts over. I don't know the exact number, but I'm just thinking about maybe like the process behind Michigan's game plan. Like maybe Washington does completely sell out to stop the run, and so you're still in the situation where Michigan's running the ball a lot, but Washington's still trying to do everything they can to stop it.
Right. I was looking at the prop board this morning, and there's a part of me that I don't think I've ever bet a single game parlay. I'm pretty sure that's true. And I don't know if I will for this game, but I think it's really interesting to take like Corum over, JJ McCarthy under rushing yards, and then like all the Michigan receivers under receiving yards, because that's what Michigan wants, right? They want a slow game with what? 8 possessions each team, right? And, Washington's going to move the ball. I have a lot of respect for this offense, but, if they can eliminate the big plays that plague Texas's defense, and Texas's defense is really good. I think that's Michigan's ideal plan, and I think you see the same thing.
Exactly. I'm totally with you there. I do like correlating, all those props that you mentioned on Michigan side of the ball, and then yeah, like Texas defense, especially their defensive line, played well for large portions of this year, but their secondary I thought was pretty weak throughout the season, and that's why Washington posed a pretty bad matchup for them because of the receivers they have. So I think when you look at Michigan and what they have at defensive back, and how good those matchups will, like Will Johnson on Roma Dunze will be a great matchup, and everything else that they have there. Like I think Michigan's defense is uniquely set up to slow down Washington's passing attack.
Absolutely. And Tej, I should mention that you are a University of Michigan graduate, right?
Yes, but no bias from me there. I just looking at the numbers when it comes to this.
No, absolutely. And I always find myself when I'm writing about Michigan trying to acknowledge my biases, living here in Ann Arbor. But at some point, you put your analyst hat on and say, hey, look, this is going to be a really hard game against Alabama, right? And hopefully, hopefully it works out. Tej, I also wanted to ask you about your work with the NFL. Maybe give us a sense for the teams that you view as Super Bowl favorites this year and the metrics that you use to in making that judgment.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think that there are like a couple Super Bowl favorites this year going into the playoffs, which is like pretty exciting. For one of them, like the Buffalo Bills, it is conditional on still making the playoffs for them to be a Super Bowl favorite. They if they win, they're in, obviously, but they would need a couple things to go their way if they lose against the Dolphins this Sunday. But I definitely see them as the second best team in the AFC behind the Baltimore Ravens, who I see as the clear cut favorite in the AFC. And then on the NFC side of things, I still see the 49ers, along with most people as the Super Bowl favorite or the highest favorite to win the Super Bowl out of that conference. But the Cowboys, I still think, are very much up there. And then the Lions, I think, because of the seeding and having to probably travel on the road twice in the NFC, might not be in that upper tier, but they still have the team that can do it. So when I look at metrics for this type of stuff, I love using expected points added, EPA, as my main metric. And when you can look at offensive production first, and then how well the defense can hold water, I think is important to me. When you look at teams that have made the Super Bowl in the last 10 years, it is very rare for a non-top 10 offense in offensive EPA per play to have end up making the Super Bowl. It's only happened 3 out of the last 24 times, I believe. But we see non-top 10 defenses make the Super Bowl all the time. Obviously, it helps to have a top 10 defense, but I just always go offense first and then defense after that.
We talk a lot about, at least us analytics people, we talk a lot about how passing is more important than running, especially in the NFL. Do you tend to look at passing EPA on offense more than running EPA, or is the run game important as well when you're looking at that?
For sure, yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. And when I do look at the splits between passing and rushing on both sides of the ball, it does follow that order where it's like offense first, defense second, and then pass game first, run game second. So like it's to me, it's offensive rush rank is still the second most correlated thing with playoff success and with regular season wins, and then after that, defensive pass rank is the third most correlated metric.
Right, for sure. And I would think that rush EPA on offense is particularly important for Baltimore and Buffalo. Is that correct for this current season?
For sure, yeah. Baltimore Buffalo do lead the league in rush EPA.
Excellent. So Tej, what is your biggest analytics takeaway from the 2023 football season?
Yeah, I mean it's really what has happened to average depth of target in this league was my biggest takeaway from the season, and I think that we had a situation in 2020 where due to a combination of a bunch of things, high level quarterback play, COVID, not letting the defense have the crowd noise, and then maybe just like defensive and offensive installs in training camp, and the offense having the advantage throughout most of the season before the defense gelled, where we had this explosion in passing attack, and average depth of target was strongly correlated to passing efficiency. And then we've seen that dip each year throughout the season. And this year, now we have a situation where Joe Burrow had the lowest average depth of target in the league. Patrick Mahomes had the second lowest average depth of target. Jared Goff, who has been one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the league this year, was third in average depth of target. So you're seeing these higher end passing offenses that were really high in last year have to rely more on yards after catch. And it's become a really interesting situation now where defenses are doing what they can to take away the deep ball, whether it's through blitzing and making the quarterback hit like their immediate hot read off of that, or playing too high shells and not letting them beat you over the top, where now these quarterbacks have to throw the ball shorter and hope their receivers can make yards after catch.
Excellent. Is this a short-term thing? And the reason I ask is because Kansas City is in a situation where, they don't have Tyreek Hill, and I know that's happened for a couple of seasons. The offense has really evolved this year. Joe Burrow's average depth of target was really low, partially because he had that leg injury at the beginning of the season. I think if he would have played out the rest of the season, when he has these weapons like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, that would have changed. And I think it did change in the last couple games that he was healthy. Like, are we just in a situation, and let's just say for the sake of argument for Detroit Lions fans, that Jameson Williams ends up becoming one of the best deep threats in the NFL in his third year next year, right? Could we see an increase in ADOT? Like, how temporary is this just because of personnel? And I think some of the fantasy people have said like ADOT is the target depth is kind of owned by the receivers. I don't know if that's actually correct, but maybe you could help me out with that as well.
For sure. No, you're definitely right about that. Like, I think there's so many influences that can change the average at the target. Like, the interesting thing is, we thought about when Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes like started their careers, and before defenses adjusted, like they were the quarterbacks that were throwing it deep to Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase respectively. But then last year, Mahomes didn't have Tyreek Hill, but Burrow still had Chase, and like they still had low average at the targets relative to the league. Like I think Patrick Mahomes was 10th and Joe Burrow was 7th, lowest, if I remember correctly. And then Jared Goff was also low as well, who I mentioned. So I do agree with you where I think the receiver has a big influence on the average at the target, but it's also how the defenses treat your ability from what they've seen before. And so I think it's pretty cyclical in that regard, where if a quarterback like Mahomes and Burrow is just beating everyone by throwing them short, now then defenses will creep up and then they can go back to their deep ball, and it can kind of vary back and forth.
For sure. Is it extra impressive what Ben Johnson, the OC at Detroit, is doing? Because, if Goff does have the third lowest A dot, but, when I look at my numbers, I'm pretty sure they're top five when I look at yards per pass attempt adjusted for opponent. Does that make it extra impressive what they're doing on the offensive side of the ball?
100%. I do think that Ben Johnson is one of the top five, if not top three, play callers in the NFL right now, and he's a play caller unlike Andy Reid and some other top play callers in the league, like we saw with Shane Steichen last year in Philly, where he's doing it with a quarterback that I don't think would be in most people's top 10 rankings from like a film perspective. But I think that's what's made it so impressive is Ben Johnson's taken this offensive line that he was given that's very high end, and built an offense that relies around them. And then that allows them to use a lot of play action concepts to get it to St. Brown and Laporta. And then also they run the ball at a decent rate to be able to get into their pretty diverse run game that allows Jared Goff to feel comfortable behind that. So it's been really cool to see like all of this being welded together by a good play caller like Ben Johnson.
So you would say that Jared Goff is outside your top 10 in terms of kind of pure passing?
I do think so. I think that when you look at Jared Goff and you see that he is a top five quarterback when not pressured, but a bottom five quarterback in terms of EPA when pressured. And I think that he is a very is a fine quarterback. He can keep your offense on the track when things are going well, but you just he just lacks some creation ability that you see from other quarterbacks that I would put in the top 10.
Interesting. And then would you put Jalen Hurts in the top 10? You mentioned Shane Steichen and that offense last year.
I would put Jalen Hurts in the top 10 because now we've seen him with two different offenses, and I still think that he has played well this year. Even if the results haven't been as well for Philadelphia, where Hurts is able to create outside of structure, he's able to get the ball downfield to both AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I've seen enough sample from Hurts to say that I would put him in the top 10.
Interesting. I kind of have my doubts about Hertz, but I will certainly acknowledge that, when I look at, I take passing success rate and then adjust for defense. And now I've made it specific to the quarterback. He has improved every single year, and the results haven't necessarily been there for the Eagles offense like it was last year, but I think there's a lot of circumstances, strength of schedule being one of them. So I think he does get credit for improving every single year, at least according to the metrics that I look at most. And then, of course, Hurts certainly adds a lot in terms of his ability to run the ball. I think he gets at least partially the credit for their insane efficiency on third and fourth and short, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you did not mention Philadelphia as part of your Super Bowl favorites, but I presume they're probably in that next tier behind Detroit and Dallas.
For sure. I think that with the division looking like it's going to go to Dallas, Philadelphia having to play the NFC South winner, who will probably be Tampa Bay, on the road is actually not like an easy game like it would be for Dallas last year, just because Philadelphia's defense is in a state now where they rank 26th in success rate on the season. They've gotten a little bit worse since changing defensive coordinators as well, and I think that where they won't be able to roll over opponents like they were able to last year in the playoffs when they took it to the Giants in the first round or in the divisional round. So I think that they're in the next tier below some of the other Super Bowl contenders.
That makes a ton of sense. If you are Dan Campbell and Detroit, how do you keep Ben Johnson around for another year?
I think it might come from the Fords, the owners, paying him a Dan Quinn type contract to keep him in Detroit. But I mean, I really think that when you look at the head coaching jobs available right now, there isn't something that is super desirable. I think that all of them except the Chargers would be a rebuild, and the Chargers might not be able to pay Ben Johnson what he's asking for from like the reports that have come out. So if he doesn't get the Chargers job, I think that you could do some convincing if from Dan Campbell's perspective to tell him that he might be better off spending another year as offense coordinator and then looking for head coaching jobs the year after.
I came into the season with kind of high hopes for Detroit's defense. I thought they made some nice personnel changes in the secondary, which is part of where they've struggled in the past couple years. It looked good for about half the year, and it's looked kind of poor the last part of the year. Where are you on this Lions defense?
Yeah, I think the Lions defense, still hasn't shown results enough to put them in like the top tier of the Super Bowl contenders that we were just talking about. Just because they don't seem to have the personnel needed to do that as of right now. I think they're going to get a little bit healthier headed into the playoffs here. Aleem McNeil, James Houston, and CJ Gardner Johnson all look like they're on track to be ready for the wild card round, which I think is pretty exciting as a Lions fan. But I still need to see the pass rush step up and finish off the sacks that they've been so close to oftentimes this year with a pretty high pressure rate but low sack rate, and then also the secondary outside of Brian Branch and Melifanu needs to step up as well. Cam Sutton's play has declined a little bit, and then they haven't had other defensive backs to really fill in yet with the injuries that they've had.
Yeah, I mean Gardner Johnson coming back, I think would be huge, right? I mean, I look at that secondary, and like you said, like Sutton hasn't been great, and that might be partially because I think CD Lamb torches a lot of cornerbacks, but he looked bad, right? So I think Gardner Johnson would be a huge player to get back.
Definitely agree. And like I think that's a really exciting defensive back room where you have Melifanu and like how well he's been playing this past month. Brian Branch, who I think is one of the better strong safeties in all of football already as a rookie. And then
Yeah.
someone as high profile as CJ Gardner Johnson would be a good addition to kind of round out that room and take some pressure off of Sutton.
You mentioned the Los Angeles Chargers job as one of the more desirable ones because of a young quarterback in Justin Herbert and some pieces on defense. Uh, Jim Harbaugh has also been linked to that job. What's kind of the latest there that you're hearing?
That job is going to be really interesting to follow because when you think about pairing a GM and head coach together, it would be harder with Jim Harbaugh to do so than with a coach in the NFL right now, like an assistant coach, like Ben Johnson, a Bobby Slowick, or Mike McDonald at the Ravens, for example, just because they probably would have someone in the front office of either their organization or another organization they used to work for that they feel like they have a cohesive connection with that they can build a roster around. Jim Harbaugh doesn't really have that. He's been out of the NFL for a while now actually, and I think that picking a GM to work with him would be a little bit harder than in the other situations I mentioned. But I still think that if you're the Chargers, you should be chasing after Jim Harbaugh because he would probably have interest in you having Justin Herbert there and some pretty exciting receiving options and to build around. And then he's also someone that's had success at every single stage of his career, like going all the way back to some of his first head coaching jobs and at both levels. So I think it would work for both sides if Harbaugh was just the head coach, but it would be interesting to see what they end up doing from a GM perspective with that.
So much intrigue in the NFL offseason. It's gonna be interesting. Tej, what is your story? How did you get into sports analytics and betting, and now your current position at Sumer Sports?
Yeah, so I was, I was a freshman at the University of Michigan, and like I hadn't picked a major really. I knew I wanted to do something statistics related, but didn't know exactly what. And so I ended up finding out that they had these clubs relating to sports analytics and relating to football analytics. And so you came and spoke at the sports analytics one. I went to meetings for the football analytics one as well, and I was just hooked instantly, honestly, on the thought processes that went behind sports analytics and how we deal with different biases and how you can build models to predict certain things and make graphs to show people to prove your points about different arguments. And so, I hadn't done any coding up until that time. I was just attending these meetings and taking it all in. And my freshman year was when COVID happened. And so we got sent home from the dorms, and so I had all this free time on my hands. So after I did what everyone else was doing, watched Tiger King, tried to make bread, like all that different COVID activities, I started with Ben Baldwin's R tutorials that I just found on Twitter. And so I was just going through those tutorials, learning how to program in R using NFL data. And what that allowed me to do was to start making some of these graphs that I saw other people making. And, it took some time to learn how to do so, but eventually it all clicked and I was posting that on Twitter. Got some criticism and constructive criticism about like how to make my analysis better, and took all of that into account. And it led to me getting in touch with Eric Eager, who was at PFF at the time, who was able to open up an internship for me at PFF between my sophomore and junior year of college that I ended up doing, and then was able to go with Eric from PFF to Sumer when he ended up taking that job, and I took a full-time job because of that.
That's awesome. I will send you a check for mentioning my appearances and in your story. I appreciate that. Was though I presume those were some of the ones where I just came in and started coding in front of everyone.
Yes, that was exactly what it was.
That was super fun because Rohit, who now works with the Houston Texans, I was like, well, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, well, we just want to learn. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know. I was just like, I'm just going to come in and code something. And I forget exactly what I did, but that was super fun. And I think it's important to give back like that. And you are now giving back like that as well with your coding tutorials on YouTube. I presume that you did that because Ben Baldwin's weren't good enough. Just kidding, Ben. But anyways, what got you into teaching people how to code?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, like you were an inspiration for that. Ben Baldwin was an inspiration. When I noticed that these coding tutorials had such a big effect on me, I realized that now that I had a pretty good understanding of how to code in both R and Python, like I thought that other people should be able to have that opportunity to do so as well. So I was just recording them because they were members of the Michigan Football Analytics Society that weren't able to come to the actual meetings where I was showing people how to live code, and I could take questions throughout the meeting if someone was getting an error and all that stuff. And so I figured I could record them, with most people being busy, and post them on YouTube. And I didn't realize that so many people would end up watching them outside of kind of that little eco society that we had at school. And it really took off, and people loved them. So I kept making them on some of my own time when I got free time, and was able to post them on YouTube, and was really happy with the way that people responded to them. And it made me feel good about myself that I was able to give something to the people that they were able to use to start creating graphs and do analysis on their own.
That's excellent. So you did most of these, what I think over like the last year, if I remember right, when I was looking at the YouTube videos.
Yeah, it was my senior year of college, so I think I ended up recording four tutorials in R, like each stage: introduction, data viz, and modeling. And then I did two or three in Python with kind of the similar stages.
Excellent. Do you have any future goals with those projects?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have something on our sumersports.com site eventually that is a little bit higher production value than me recording in my room, but something along the lines of people being able to fill out code, submit it, get feedback, like all that stuff. I think is something that Eric and I have talked about, and something that we're hoping to get to eventually.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work at Sumer Sports?
For sure, yeah. So I'm a data scientist. Like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, and I have worked mainly on the consumer side. So for those who don't know, Sumer Sports is kind of like a two-phase company in a sense, where the business side is phase one, and the focus of that is getting to work with NFL teams, providing them with ways to optimize their roster, and assist in building their roster. And then the consumer side is focused on some of the things that we mentioned, providing data and analysis, articles, podcasts, anything that's public facing is something that I've tried to work on. So, in regards to that, I write two articles every week. I record a podcast where I talk about stats, and my friend Sean comes with like the film scheme side of things, and we can kind of go back and forth on that. And then I work on the website, and providing data for people to use, and putting up new metrics there that I think can be useful. So all that's been a really enjoyable experience so far.
Excellent. And are there paid services at Sumer now, or is it mostly still on the free side?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now, everything on our website is free. Eventually, we will probably have a free and a premium type sign up sheet where you can kind of pick how much data you want to have access to, which articles you want to read. But right now, since we're just starting off, the most things are available for everyone.
Excellent. I usually like to end the show with a potentially non-sports question. What's your favorite book?
Yeah, I love talking about this. My favorite book is The Glass Castle by Janet Walls. I read it when I was in high school, and liked it so much I ended up rereading it when I was in college. I thought it was such an interesting book because it showed like just how a really dysfunctional upbringing can affect people. And I was someone who grew up in the Metro Detroit area, as you know, and which is a very nice area, and didn't have a ton of exposure to how other people grew up. So it was just really interesting to see what it looked like for someone to grow up in like a non-traditional way. And it was definitely an emotional book, and really opened up my eyes to how other Americans have had to handle different adversities in their life.
I've heard of this. She grew up in a family of four in rural West Virginia. Is that right?
Yeah,
And it
exactly. That it was a family that was they're pretty like nomadic where they kept moving around, but they ended up settling in West Virginia.
right. And if they're nomadic, I mean, she ended up becoming highly educated as she's a writer now. But I mean, I think that's part of the story, right? About how you go from her family to being a very, I think, pretty famous writer.
Exactly. Her dad was someone who preached education to the kids, but in like non-traditional ways where, he tried to teach them with experience instead of, kind of like how you would think about things in school. And, her dad had a very up and down life in that sense where she was able to keep a lot of the good messages that he gave while, not letting some of the bad stuff that he was doing affect her while, I think some of her other siblings were less fortunate.
That's awesome. I try to enforce that as well with my kids. So maybe I need to pick up that book. Uh, Thank you so much for that recommendation, Tej Seth, and thank you for coming on this episode of Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find your work.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on and appreciate you allowing me to do this. If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, it's at TEJFB Analytics. So Tej FB Analytics.
And you have your courses linked at the top of your profile, which is great. And that's it. There's nowhere else. You haven't written a book or anything we need to plug or anything.
No, yeah, I mean, just check out those courses and then check out, kind of some of the stuff we're doing on sumersports.com.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting email newsletter if you're looking for any action on a given weekend. This is the free service for you. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.